Hi everyone. This is the 6th Rugby Round Table that we've done so far, and this is the first one that is sort of not necessarily about rugby all the way through. First few weeks we've been talking about playing rugby during COVID and after COVID and funding and all that sort of stuff. But this week is slightly more personal, I guess. We're going to talk about mental health and the rugby community. And joining me today is Tom Home, the founder of Blokes, which is a new initiative which he'll talk about this afternoon. Alex Rieder, former Wasps and Rotherham Titans, and Nick Allso from Staines RFC. How are we, gentlemen?
Good, mate. How are things with you?
Yeah, we're doing all
good.
right. We're doing all right.
Yeah, I'm all right.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I got a bit sunburnt, but otherwise it's all good.
I'm olive skin, so it literally as soon as I walk outside, it's like.
Very jealous. Very jealous.
Just get burnt.
I've been on the plastic pitches eating all afternoon.
Oh really?
Yeah. Chasing children. Yeah. So yeah.
Nice. If you want to put anything in the comments during this, we'll read them out. We'll answer any points that you put in there. Evening, Andy. He's watched every one of these and downloaded every podcast. So hello, Andy. Hope you're well. So yeah, let's start off by sort of why did you guys want to be on this one? We'll start with Tom. Why is mental health so important to you?
I think it's something that I've kind of always been affected by, but never really knew about it until I was probably diagnosed with it. I think I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and PTSD November 2016, and not just because of when I was kind of diagnosed with it, but it completely just flipped my world upside down. It was playing rugby for the university I went to. I was out with friends and, pretty sociable guy. And yeah, all of a sudden I just completely shut down and cut myself off. I stacked on a load of weight, which you can probably tell I'm still trying to shift. And I think I just completely became isolated, paranoid, so hyper anxious all the time. And yeah, it just completely changed how I was living my day-to-day life. And I think I've always kind of having been affected by it in the way I have been, I've always been really keen to kind of raise awareness around just how impactful it can be on your life. And I suppose, I'm very kind of passionate about mental health as a whole, but more importantly, I lean more toward men's mental health. And I think, as cliche as it sounds, we don't talk about it because we think we can't, because we think we're going to be judged, because we think we're going to be looked at differently. And I get that, because I've had that before, where I was convinced that my friends were going to see me differently, my family were going to see me differently, all the people that I cared about would treat me differently. So that's, I suppose, in a way, why I tried to deal with it myself, because I wanted to save face and I wanted to seem like everything was all right when obviously it wasn't. And yeah, so I think ever since then, I've kind of always been passionate about helping other guys, in particular, open up about their mental health and just ask for help, just be honest, because at the end of the day, to speak isn't weak. It's something that everybody needs to do, and everybody needs to deal with it in their own way. But I think for me, speaking about my mental health has helped me manage it, get it under control. So yeah, I've always been sort of keen to encourage others to do the same.
That's great, Tom. That really is great. Nick, you were telling us off air that mental health is something really sort of passionate about helping everybody. And how do you go about?
Well, I mean, so my story's a little bit different to Tom's, but there are lots and lots of similarities. So I I am married to a clinical depressive. I love her to bits. She takes pills every morning to get her through. That's something she's inherited from her father, and is something that runs in their family. So I think it's really important that we make it clear there are lots of different kinds of mental health issues, and they're all massively important, and we all need to talk about them all the time. My battles, I guess, with mental health started, same lady involved in the story, I guess. She and I split up 10 years ago, and I found myself spiraling downwards and downwards. I had to move, so I left the rugby club where I'd been playing and didn't really know what to do. Went along to another rugby club, and the game had been cancelled. Nobody told me. I'd kind of disappeared into a bit of a pit. And it was getting pretty dicey. Looking back at it, I went along the next week after a friend of mine had said, for God's sake, just give them a chance. Of course, they didn't tell you, they don't have your number. Went along the next week, played one of the best games of my career, and couldn't play the following week, and got 5, maybe 6 messages from guys I'd met once saying, oh, mate, how are you? Where are you? Why aren't you here? And I tell people that those rugby players that I hardly knew at the time probably saved my life, and I don't think that that's over egging the pudding. I genuinely think they do. I spent 5 amazing years playing at Rams with those guys. If I could still be playing at a good enough level and hadn't got into coaching and rugby director, I would still be playing at Rams, because at the end of the day, that's the club where my heart is as a result of those guys. So I think that's really important, the support that we get. I've been diagnosed, like Tom, with anxiety, with depression, as a result of what my wife and I went through, I think. And I've always struggled a little bit that people look at me and say, oh, but you're a big tough rugby player, you know. What do you mean you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and sit on the loo in tears or feel sick or whatever because you don't want to do the session or go to the meeting that the next morning? You're a big tough guy. So I think that's something that rugby needs to sort out. I'm aware that I'm rambling a little bit, but hopefully I'm getting to the point. So yeah, I'm really passionate that rugby clubs are safe places, and we talk about them as safe places, and everybody is keen for them to be safe places, but a lot of stuff that goes on at rugby clubs stops them being safe places. And maybe I'll touch on that a little bit later, but yeah, that's my story, really. That's why I was really keen to talk about mental health issues. There was a young man took his own life beginning of July. He had been a High Wycombe player and an Ealing player, both clubs that I'm very closely involved in. And I got really, really angry about it, because I just thought somewhere the world has let this young man down somehow. I don't know how. I hardly knew the guy. And I thought, do you know what? My goal now as newly appointed DOR at Staines, as one of the community team at Ealing, as a bloke, as a rugby player, whatever label you put on me, my goal is to make sure that happens to as few other young men as possible. There you go. That's me.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Nick. Alex, you recently retired from Wasps after sort of a series of injuries. Do you want to tell us through sort of that process and why sort of coming on today was important to you?
Yeah, so look, I've been very privileged throughout my life. I was lucky enough to go to the top boarding schools of the country. Obviously, as the son of quite a well-off family, so I never had to worry about anything for a long period of my life. And so I went into professional sport, and it was, luckily I was always doing well. I was always, performing well and things like that. And things were great. And had my dream move to Wasps when I was 21. you know, like that's everything I'd worked towards, and worked hard for the first couple of years, and then finally became first choice 6. I was told that look, you're first choice 6. I was thinking at Wasps, like, who knows where my career can go from here? This is great. Everything I'd worked towards, and third game in, I dislocated my shoulder. And I never had an injury really before. I was always quite robust, and just get my shoulder. And so in my head, I was like, look, this is what it is. I can move on from this. And so I had 2 operations on that because of the severity of it, because I tore my whole rotator cuff. It was dislocated. It was quite a mess. And anyway, I returned 5.5 months later, and that was less than what was predicted. So I was like, right, everything's great. And first game back was against Exeter Chiefs, and came on the field, made a couple of tackles, thought, right, everything's great, shoulder feels good, right, let's just crack on. And then got the ball, made a line break. I beat 3 defenders, threw one-on-one with the fullback, went to step, got a tackle from the side and dislocated my whole knee, which is pretty extreme. And sort of my parents were there. My partner, she's a doctor, and she was doing a thing called an elective where you spend 2 months abroad or whatever. And so she was in Zanzibar at the time. So she was away. So I was with my just my mum and dad. And we're in the ambulance going to the hospital. They're calling ahead saying there's a chance we might need to amputate this guy's leg. You know, we're going in for emergency surgery. And, you know, I woke up that morning thinking, right, everything's fine. I'm going to get back to normal. And then less than 12 hours later, I was being told I'll be lucky if I walk again. So, you know, it hit me how quickly life can change. And for someone that never really dealt with much adversity, I was very privileged, I was very lucky. And suddenly to have all this adversity almost in one go, I didn't really know how to deal with it. And as everyone's touched on, really, I think there's always that bit of a stigma with men and talking about things. And for me, it was always a bit like, you know what, when I'm feeling down, it was always, oh, is it a flash in the pan? I'm not, you know, I don't want to burden anyone. And that was always a feeling. Like if you're ever struggling about selection and things like that, it was never, I don't want to burden anyone. I just want to, if I'm chatting to someone, I'd rather just chat about sort of not insignificant things and just take my mind off it. And so actually when I had all this adversity that I couldn't escape from, I was really trapped, and you just left. And I had all my family and friends and everyone gathered around me. You know, you've got all these, you know, you've got people like Cipriani Haskell calling you, asking how you're doing, like these big stars taking their time out to see how you are. And on paper, you should think, geez, I've got family, friends, I've got a huge foundation. But actually, the sort of paradox of it is that you push a lot of people away. And what I ended up doing was doing the opposite to a rugby player. So I was eating dreadfully. I was doing everything the opposite to what a rugby player should be, because in my head, I just wanted to escape from reality almost. And I was pushing everyone away from me because I didn't want to be almost associated with it. Because when I'm associated with it, then I have to accept the reality of this new normality. And it was really a tough period. And I really let myself down. I put on a load of weight. I really didn't work hard enough at the start. I felt a lot of sympathy for myself. And with those moments, I can look back now and say, you know, I wish I could shake myself. But when you're in those moments, it's a real tough period. And thankfully, people were patient with me and gave me the opportunity to work through it. And I think that's always a thing that you need to balance, sort of going through pain and going through suffering and going through it in almost your own time, because it's one of those like a bereavement a lot of the times. Like you've lost something, and to an extent you need time to grieve, but equally if you're left to your own devices to grieve on your own, I think actually it can spiral out of control. And that's unfortunately what happened with me. And looking back now, and the reason why I want to come on, you know, long story short, why I want to come on is to speak about why it's so important to not only speak out, but then family and friends, it's all right to press the situation, ask you and push and try and support you. Because I personally, I mean, there's no set template for mental health. You know, everyone deals with things differently. Whatever my story is might not correlate to someone else, but it might someone to another person. But for me, I think it's important that you know that when you're in trouble, there are people around you, whether or not you want to know it or acknowledge it or whatever. It's important that you do get guided, because I was on the floor. I was, you know, proverbially on canvas. I didn't know how to get up. And if I was left without anyone, I don't know where I would have got to. You know, I was having dreadful thoughts of life and everything like that. And actually, it did take a bit of, you know, a bit of, look, you need to move on from here. We can do it. You can get through it, to really move me forward. And it was setting short-term goals and things like that that really supported me. And that sort of balance, that it's understanding that life is tough and everyone's going to have struggles, but it's knowing that it's okay to speak out. But then also, if you know someone's having troubles, for me, I think it's important that you're not forceful, but that you are sort of, you're not standoffish. I think it's important that you are very much over egging it almost, and being like, look, let's talk, let's go for this meal, let's do it, to the point that eventually they'll do it. They'll go out for a meal, they'll talk, they'll open up, and the release from those moments, I think, are huge. And that's the main thing that you speak on. I've done a lot of these podcasts, I've done a lot of conversations on radios and everything, and always the main thing is that these mediums, they might reach out to people that I would never reach out to normally, and as long as I can help one or two people, well, at the end of the day, that's a great feeling to have. And I think that's the thing. Everyone just needs to be honest and speak about things. And when you see anyone, whether or not they're your best friend or someone you just met in the street, if you see someone struggling, you should speak to them, regardless if they even want to hear it, because I think it's important that they know. As I said, it's a very weird scenario you're in, because you push these people away who care about you, but it's important that you just persevere and just let them know you're there. And you know, as I know I can waffle as well, but I do think it's really important that
It's all good.
People understand there's no template, but no matter what, just know that you've got a support group around you, because life is very tough. You know, you'll go through one struggle, but another struggle will always come along. You know, like, just quickly touching, like, obviously lockdown, trying to transition from my career in rugby to a new career in business, obviously got stagnated, and I got really far with a lot of interviews, I had a lot of conversations, and that all got stuck, and I really struggled. You know, I broke down a few times in lockdown, and in my head I was like, oh, I dealt with this career-ending injury, all these traumas, surely I can deal with this. But actually, you can't pigeonhole what a struggle is to someone. What might be insignificant to one person might be hugely significant to another. And it's about understanding that you can't judge someone based on how you would react to a situation. All you can do is be there and be a rock and a foundation and make sure you support them. And that's the important aspect. And I think that's why, again, all these mediums are really important. So, yeah.
Thanks for that, Alex. That was I love the honesty. That was brilliant. Thank you. Nick, you touched on it a minute or so ago, but how has the rugby community sort of rallied around you, sort of previously and now?
Well, I mean, like I said, when I first moved to Rams, the guys there were, you can probably tell, I'm a person that talks a lot, not always about the right things, but that first game I played for them, I got a lift up there with somebody, and I told him, and they recognised me. Those of you that are watching this and that can actually see me will understand why they recognise me. I played against them for years, so they were slightly surprised when I turned up and got into the car with them. But they started talking. You know, why have you moved from your previous club and what's going on? And I was open and upfront. I said, my wife and I are split up. I've moved to Reading. Here I am. So they said, so how are things? And I said, I'm struggling. And we chatted, and they were great, but it was just kind of rugby chat. The following weekend, I couldn't play. I was down visiting my mum, and I got the messages from the guys that I'd been playing with. Where are you? Why aren't you here? What's going on? Is everything all right? And that just made me remember that there are people out there that are really interested. And I've always had a sort of low self-esteem thing, I think, and it used to manifest itself as arrogance as a kid. And I just was really surprised that people were interested in what I was doing, and the support that they gave me through the period when I was separated from my wife and when we got back together, and all of that. And just in general, after that, they kind of forgot that I was Nick, the guy that turned up out of nowhere because he'd split up with his wife, and I was just the slightly chubby hooker stroke tight head who wandered around a pitch every now and again and did his best. But you know, the support that I got from those guys was brilliant, and I miss them. Typical man, we don't stay in touch very much, but you know, there it is. From a director of rugby's point of view, from a coach's point of view, however you look at it, maybe a leader within the rugby club organisation, I've seen there be situations where there's really, really poor support over people that are struggling with their mental health. I spoke to a director of rugby who I won't mention his name, but maybe I should name and shame him. But he was talking to me about a young man, and he said, "Oh, he's a bit fragile, so you have to put an arm around him." And I just looked at him. What do you mean? What do you mean he's fragile? And yeah, he couldn't enunciate better than to describe him as fragile. You know, if you met the guy, you wouldn't describe him as fragile. He was a unit, but clearly had his demons and needed support with them, not people kind of babying him and those kind of issues. And I think the director of rugby in question was probably trying to be supportive. He was probably saying, you know, we need to look after this guy. He's a talent, but he was doing it in such a way as to say, this is, you know, he's not quite the full ticket. Whereas if he had a ruptured knee ligament or a bad back or something like that, he wouldn't have batted an eyelid about it. He'd have said, yeah, he needs to. We need to look after him because he's, you know, his knee's a bit dicey, and yeah, that's the other end of the coin from the guys at Rams who rescued me, I guess. And I see lots of it. I move around rugby clubs. Like I said, I work for Ealing Trailfinders, and I'm DOR here at Staines, and I see lots of coaches, and I see some that are amazingly supportive, some that are trying to be supportive, and some that really, really don't understand that they need to. I guess maybe life is different than it was when they were younger. You know, they're my age or older perhaps, and life is different. The stresses are different. So I just, yeah, like I say, my goal is to go out there and make sure that those guys know that their role is to be a support, and that rugby clubs should be the safest places they can be. I'd be interested, Alex, something you said. I just wondered how much support, like proper support, Wasps gave you. You mentioned Haskin and Danny Sipp and guys like that, but what about the club itself? Were they supportive? Did they get you help when you needed it?
So our club doctor, Ralph Mitchell, he has so he's a GP with specialisation in mental health, and he was a very kind Northern Irish lad. Always could speak to him any hour of the day. Always there, you know, sort of to lend a hand and things like that. And it was great. But sometimes the problem I had, and unfortunately it always comes down to a lot of funding, is sometimes when it comes to, for example, playing professional rugby, when it's your career 24/7, you know, you have to eat, sleep, breathe it, you get a knock, you take it home. Sometimes you want to speak to someone outside of a club, you know, so for example, you want to speak to someone that might not be as affiliated with the club as they are, because then you can maybe, you know, sometimes you're worried about what you might say, where it could get back to. Equally, you worry that maybe their perspective might be sort of from a certain perspective, and it might not give you a rounded opinion. And there's a lot of stuff going on, and Ralph was absolutely amazing. He's, still to this day we speak and stuff like that. He's absolutely fantastic. But what I would have liked is for a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever, maybe that was just external to the club, that the club funded, but that it was external to speak to, because sometimes you're speaking to people and it's so rugby orientated, and actually sometimes you need a bit of grounding. You sometimes get in a bubble with sport or whatever. And it could be stressed about, sort of your family life, but you only speak to family. So how can you ever get another perspective? And sometimes it's good to speak to someone that's separated from that element, so that you can understand actually maybe where you're at. And look, there's obviously clearly a huge amount of work that needs to go into sports, men, and especially towards men, because with the stigma involved. But I think a lot of it does come from the people around you to an extent, like the players. I know that, as I said, we didn't have a huge amount apart from Ralph, but for me, the main thing was actually just the players, which was a relief, because they were good. But then on the flip side, it's because they'd been through a lot of struggles themselves. So you're in a strange paradigm that everyone's struggling, so everyone can bounce off each other, but then no one's fully releasing those feelings because there's no one to speak to. So you're sort of just bouncing off each other, saying, "Oh, help! I'll help! I'll help! We'll talk." But everyone's gone through a lot of struggles throughout all sports because of pressures from selection to whatever, and there's no real escape. So you can speak to each other, and that's nice, but it never really solves the scenario. You can speak and you can do and you feel a bit better, but it's sort of just like putting a plaster over a cut. It's not necessarily fixing it. It's just sort of covering over the cracks. And that unfortunately was the scenario a lot, that you'd bounce off each other because everyone knows struggles in sport, but because we didn't have anyone specialized in it to actually properly give us sort of the tricks or whatever, or give us the ideas to really move past it, you're sort of papering over these cracks just consecutively, and eventually it's all going to come unstuck, which it did. So
that's really
Has
interesting.
there been anything sort of? Sorry, Nick. Alex, was there anything sort of post-retirement that Wasps helped you with? Not with your mental health, but with sort of your retirement in general.
The thing with mental health is, as I said, there's no set template, and there's a sort of a lot goes into mental health. For example, it could be pressures about finances, it could be pressures on, and things can materialize and build up to antagonize, a trivial situation and make things worse. So obviously, retirement is stressful. It's a huge change that already can antagonize the situation. So then also you've got, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to pay for all these things? So Wasps were actually really great. They paid me the rest of my contract. They gave me time. They gave me physio. They gave help. They obviously paid for my operation that I needed to finish, all these things. And so that really helps a lot from a mental health side, because it takes away a lot of the pressures. But equally, there is only so much money in the pots, and I think people have this misconception that there's an endless amount of money in professional rugby, and there really isn't. And they unfortunately look towards where we're going to generate the most outcomes. Is it through a strength and conditioner who's going to get us strong, or is it through a psychologist who's going to look at someone who's struggling? And a lot of the times they go towards sort of the physical performance aspect rather than the mental side. And I think actually it needs to be a balance. But so with that, from a mental side, as I said, Ralph was fantastic, our GP, who was speaking to me and doing all these things. But outside of that, it sort of, I retired. They looked after me financially, but that was really it. Which is, I didn't expect more. There's only so much I can do, but as I said, the lockdown really I did struggle with. So it's a scenario that everyone struggled with. So it's, as I said, like, it's not something that's just solely on me. So I can't have these big grudges. it's a scenario that no one saw coming. It's unprecedented. So Wasps, how could I ever hold them to fault that they didn't protect me through my transition when no one knew this was coming? So they did as much as I could ever have hoped for, though. So I was pretty happy with that.
That's good. That's really good. Really good. Nick, you were about to. Sorry, I butted in.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on what Alex was saying, that they weren't there wasn't a psychologist or a mental health care professional other than the GP. And I was just thinking, I'm sure that the GP didn't deal with your knee reconstruction and your shoulder reconstruction, mate, did he? But it seems interesting that even at what should be the sharp end of these things, that there's still a lag. And I've mentioned that I work up at Trailfinders, and we've got a chaplain up there, smashing guy. He's a local vicar. He's a Welshman, so he probably loves his rugby. He gets tickets to the game and comes in and spends time with the players. And I've actually taken that on board here at Staines, and we've got a chaplain here who has dealt with a number of issues that have cropped up with the young guys. Eddie Jones mentioned earlier in the year. I'm just trying to think which of the millions of podcasts and webinars it was that I've been watching while we've been in lockdown. I think it was Jack Patton and John Fish. And he was asked how you deal with the mental health of players, and he said, you got to leave it to the professionals. I won't do the accent. And I would challenge that and say that the coaches are the guys that know the players best. So yes, having the professionals in place, having the appropriate people there to give the correct support is right, but the coaches are the people that know their players best. And certainly grassroots rugby, we can't afford to have mental health specialists on hand all the time. But just having a chaplain, and Chris, our chaplain here, he's not a Bible basher in any way, shape or form. That wouldn't appeal to me, but he is very supportive of the guys, and Paul at Trailfinders is the same. So yeah, I don't think there was any point to that. I just me talking again.
No, can I quickly
That's
interject?
fine, mate.
Interestingly, so with that, it is that, as you said, at amateur level, and this is a big thing, across all elements of sport, that sport provides that opportunity to sort of bond with people, and therefore provides such a great opportunity to speak about things. And the thing is, people, when someone's struggling, they might not understand it themselves. It could be a number of things, especially in amateur level. You've got a job at home, you've got a family at home, you're balancing all these things, and it could be such a random sort of thing that's just set you off. But the greatest thing that sport provides is it provides that brotherhood or companionship, because you're emotionally connected to each other. So that's why these clubs, you need to really stick by each other and create a culture of communication, both about the sport that you're in, but then also outside of it. And that's why I've always been passionate about building relationships outside of just the paradigm you're in, because actually, you could be part of a rugby club, but it could be based about God knows what. It could be anything. And having that opportunity just to rely on the mates around you is so important, because, as I said, it could be a family thing. They could have had a newborn, their partner could have postnatal depression. It could be anything. And it's just about saying, what, this is really affecting me. I really am struggling. But because you've got that emotional bond through sports, that is hard to get in any other aspect of life. So with sport, you pay both physically and mentally into it. I think it creates a connection between your teammates that is hard to compare to any other aspect. I think with that, you need to use that as a tool in order to really support each other when there's a real issue at hand. And as you said, there's not enough money for a psychiatrist to come into a lot of these amateur clubs. They don't get paid. They do it off their own bat. They could be working, as a brickie for 10 hours of the day and then turn up to train in the evening. And they just might be emotionally finished. They might be exhausted, but it's important that regardless of whether or not they have the experts or the psychiatrists there, that they've got their mates around that are mature enough and man enough, so to say, that they'll say, you know what, you can speak. At the end of the day, we're not going to judge you. Geez, we've all been in a situation. Tell me what you have to say, and I'll see if I can help you. And I think that's what sport ultimately should be about. It's about being a place that people can go and express themselves both on and off the field, both mentally and physically, because fundamentally, what else is there about sport?
Absolutely. We're in a real privileged position to know our teammates well enough that we can see when they're having a bad day, or whether it's a longer than a bad day, or whether they react weirdly to something else. Yeah, you couldn't be more right, mate. Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. Tom, let's talk about Blokes. What is it? Where did it start? How did it start? And how did you get Alex involved?
So I suppose really Blokes is what it does what it says on the tin. I think I've kind of always wanted to start something around men's mental health. I've never known what to do, because I don't, there are thousands and thousands of accounts and organisations, brands, whatever it may be, that sort of bang the men's mental health drum. And the last thing you want to do is kind of add to the noise that doesn't really do anything, or doesn't really solve anything, or doesn't look to solve anything, more importantly. So I think I started, Blokes, extremely new, was started sort of beginning of July this year. And really it just, a bit kind of what Nick and Alex have spoken about having that sort of brotherhood and that community kind of feel. Blokes for me, my kind of vision for it, and for where I want it to kind of inevitably go, is just to become almost like a hub for conversation, a hub for interaction, a hub for men to know that they can speak about how they're feeling, what's upsetting them, what's getting down, whether it be they've had a bad day at work, or they're behind on the bills, or they've had an argument with the missus, or whatever it may be. For me, I wanted to start something that I know I would have benefited from when I was at my lowest. When I didn't want to talk to my girlfriend, I didn't want to talk to my mum and dad, I didn't want to talk to my friends, because again, it kind of all loops back to that fear of being judged and that fear of being looked at differently. Whereas, if I had had kind of this safe haven, this community to go to, and to speak to speak to like-minded people who can completely empathise and understand, how I'm feeling. For me, that would have really kind of helped to have lifted the weight. It's that classic saying, a problem shared is a problem halved, and I do truly believe that, because almost like Alex touched on earlier, when you do speak to somebody, that initial kind of just wave of relief, and that wave of just euphoria, that you've been able to just be honest and just be like, mate, yeah, I'm feeling bad, I'm struggling, I'm really down. So yeah, that's kind of where Blokes came from. In terms of getting sort of Alex on board, I reached out to Alex because, obviously, being a massive rugby fan myself, obviously, knowing Alex has opened up about his mental health before, just did the classic Twitter, slid into his DMs, just had a, if you would be interested in sort of coming on board and, wanting to kind of help really just push out the message of who Blokes is, what we're trying to achieve, and I suppose how we're going to do it. And, as well as Alex, I've been incredibly lucky to have also brought on board Tom Lindsay, Dan Mugford, also a couple more sort of ambassadors in the pipeline to be announced over the next couple of weeks. But also just the amount of, I don't want to say just guys, but the amount of, men like me, who, aren't aren't professional athletes, aren't aren't in the public eye, who are just passionate about opening up that dialogue about men's mental health, and just kind of wanting to kick this taboo to the curb, per se. And I've been incredibly lucky to have had some really amazing conversations with a lot of great guys over the last couple of weeks. And yeah, to be honest, I think what's next what is immediately next for Blokes is we've kind of got a website being developed at the moment by a good friend over in the Isle of Man. And yeah, hopefully that'll sort of, that'll kind of act as, I hate using the word forum because it reminds me of like in the late 90s. But yeah, it's going to kind of act as kind of like a just an open, just a blank canvas, an open page where every Tom, Dick, and Harry can log on and just be like, yeah, I've had a bad day. I've had a terrible week at work. My boss is getting on my back. I'm not, I've got nothing to look forward to. Lockdown's getting to me. Whatever it is, they can just jump onto Blokes, just let it all out, and then they know they're going to be surrounded by a community of men who understand what they're going through and want to support them, want to be there for them, want to pick them up off the floor when they don't feel they can do it themselves. So yeah, that's Blokes sort of in a sort of a whirlwind tour in a bit of a nutshell.
How can people get involved?
So at the moment, we're active on Twitter and Instagram. We're at _Blokes, and on there we as I say, we've got a lot of great ambassadors like Alex, like Tom and Dan, like all the other guys that are involved, and we're really starting to build quite a nice community of guys who are passionate about mental health, whether or not they suffer from it themselves or know people suffered or whatever it may be. So I think it's always going to be there. It's only going to grow. We're going to grow as a community together. And one of the first thing I tweeted out on the account is something that I guarantee that I'll stick by, which is that Blokes won't be a run-of-the-mill men's mental health account. We won't bang the drum for 6 months and then slowly sort of peter off and tail off, because of how badly mental health has affected my life. Not just my life, but my mental health experiences have also been incredibly hard for my family, for my friends who have stuck by me through thick and thin, and I'll never be able to repay them for that. And yeah, it won't just be sort of a flash in the pan. We will do something about it, and we will open up the conversation.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for that. Yeah, get involved, everybody. Why not? If we can tackle that stigma, then great. Couple of minutes left, so let's finish with what did come in the realm of questions or points. I don't want to keep you guys here too much longer, but let's have a look. There are quite a few top athletes who, for different reasons, suffered conditions of various mental health problems. So I can imagine the pyramid finishes in everyday life. The RFU or sports federations, and indeed the government, who are responsible for cuts in care and specifically mental health over the years, should do more. Anyone want to chime in on that one?
Well, just a quick thing. It's, as I said, money is finite, and so ultimately it falls down into where they think money is best to be invested. For me, I feel that when the mind's in the right place, it can make a huge amount of difference. But equally, I think outside of necessarily huge financial burdens, there are ways in which people can be supported emotionally and physically, and I think that having an opportunity to have dialogue, understand each other, and it all boils down to building relationships with each other. So making sure the workplace, both in sports or just in a normal business environment, as long as that environment isn't toxic and that it's there's opportunities for people to speak their mind, and understand each other and the pressures that are going on. I think I think that will go further in supporting people, because everything always boils down to that first initial dialogue about opening up about your struggles and making changes. And I think if there are people who you can speak to and feel confident in speaking to, I think if it can be done, to have the resources to employ a psychiatrist, actually, I think that's the next best step. Obviously, I think money should be thrown at this, but mental health is it is a new thing, and adversity is important. People need to have struggles to some degree to know their strength and know that there are ups and downs, and adversity is a key aspect of becoming a stronger person. But there are ways in which we can facilitate, and whether or not it needs to be the government funding loads, I think so. But ultimately, I understand that there are financial burdens, especially now. I think the main thing that people need to do is create an opportunity in a space that conversation can be had without sort of stigma and sort of, you know, people frowning down on you or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as you said, there's no endless pot of money. As much as we'd like to throw everything at it, not always possible. We'll finish with this last point from Emma. Let's bring this up on. Do you think more social events, attendance of each other's games between men's and women's teams, could aid or provide more support? Curious to know if anyone would feel more comfortable opening up outside of their side/team, but insane. Obviously, we know mental health isn't gender exclusive, but men can find it harder because of the stigma. In short, can women's teams support men's better? Nick, that's probably a good one for you. Staines have got Harlequins ladies down there, as well as Staines' men's teams. Could that be something that?
I think anybody that you're comfortable talking to is a great thing, and I know some men don't feel comfortable talking to women because we've been brought up in a macho show no fear sort of environment. That's kind of hardwired into us. Equally, some guys are more relaxed talking to the ladies about that sort of thing because the macho competition isn't there. I think it's, horses for courses, isn't it? Alex has said a couple of times rightly that there isn't a set agenda for mental health. If it works, that's brilliant. So the more people that are involved and the more people that are part of the support network and the team, the more different types of people, the better it's got to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm conscious of your time. Thank you for giving up your evenings tonight. I think we're going to leave it there. But that was an incredible discussion, and opened my eyes to a lot of things. I suffered, but to be honest, it was better to listen to you guys talk, and hopefully everyone else at home got to hear the real sort of stories and sort of no holds barred sort of accounts of everything. I really appreciate the fact that you all came on and chatted tonight, and just want to say thank you, Tom, Alex, and Nick. I think we'll end it there. I don't really know what else to say, to be honest, but so thank you guys. It's an absolute pleasure. For those who are watching, thank you very much. Next week we're going to be talking about grassroots rugby in Scotland, and then the week after it's the big one. We have a live Q&A session with Steve Granger, who's going to take everybody's Facebook questions of the return to rugby and the things that are going on at the RFU. I believe he's not done one of these before, so that should be fun. Again, Tom, Alex, Nick, thank you so much for giving up your evening. Enjoy your rest of the day, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and let's catch up soon and we'll do this again.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you all for watching, and
Great.
yeah, we'll see you again.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sean. See you all later.
Yes, Rob, there will be a part 2.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.